We've talked with Dr. Ramani about narcissism before, but we've never gone this in depth. Welcome to the Med Circle series, Narcissistic Personality Disorder, the Secondhand Smoke of Mental Health. You were one of the first people to ever come on Med Circle. Mm-hmm. You have made such a huge impact.
I'm so glad.
On
I
millions of people's lives.
We're getting lots of emails. I'm so happy because it's helping people understand this and sort of remove some of the responsibility from themselves and come up with a realistic game plan, which is so important to me. That's why I'm in this. I mean, to help people, almost like help people save themselves and move into a far more bright future.
Yes, and we did one video on this topic. Mm-hmm. I don't even know how long it was, like 10 minutes, something like that. And now we're dedicating an entire series to the topic.
I think it's good because I think that's going to help. A lot of people have a lot of questions, and I'm hoping we'll be able to dispel some of that and create some more understanding.
Before I sat down with you the first time, I did not know that narcissism was a personality disorder.
Narcissism is actually not a personality disorder.
I was right.
See, and that's already one of the big misconceptions out there, and why people get their sort of themselves all up in a froth is narcissism is a pattern. I don't know that I'd call it a trait as much as a collection of patterns or traits. Mm-hmm. Narcissistic personality disorder is a disorder.
Yes.
And if you look at existing epidemiological studies, 1% to 3% maybe, mostly because these folks don't get into treatment because they don't think there's anything wrong with them.
Right.
So it's very difficult to get meaningful statistics on what the true rates of narcissistic personality disorder are in the population. Narcissism, whole other game. Much more endemic. It's a pattern. People say, well, don't label people. I'm like, that's no different than saying he's agreeable, he's sweet, he's funny, he's narcissistic. They're patterns.
The first video we did on narcissism, millions and millions of views. Still even growing at the time of filming this every day. Why is this topic resonating with so many people?
It's the topic of our time. There's no two ways about it. It's the topic of our time, it's misunderstood, and it is absolutely destroying people. The fact is because people don't understand it, they don't understand that they're even in it. It's almost like it's like having an illness and you don't know why you're getting more and more tired every week, and then you finally go see a doctor and the doctor's like, oh, you have da-da-da, or you're being exposed to da-da-da, and they're like, thank you for the explanation. The number of people I have worked with who said to me, had I not come and consulted with you clinically and understood what this pattern was, I would have stayed living like this forever and probably ended up in an early grave. I mean,
But when you say that, not because they have narcissistic personality
but because
disorder,
they're dealing
living
with it.
somebody
So
with,
it's the issue of our time, and here's where it gets tricky. We've rewarded it in our society. We're saying like, behave badly, treat people badly, throw people under the bus. Let's reward you. Behave in a way that's uncivil and unkind and be mean, and we'll give you your own TV show. So that's what's happening.
You said something to me, and I don't remember if it was on or off camera, but you said the book on narcissism could be titled How to Be a Man in Today's World and Succeed.
Yeah. Absolutely.
And it would be
100%.
the same exact
content. It would be the same. It was
like
like a rule book. I actually had a student once come to me after class and say, you know, I'm trying to succeed in business. And after learning about narcissism, I now realize that if I do all these things, I'll be really good at sales. Can you teach me? I was like, no.
Wait, teach him how to be a narcissist?
No.
Okay, but just for fun, can you teach someone how to be a narcissist?
Not really. I'll be frank with you. I'd be doing a lot better financially if I was a bit more narcissistic. In fact,
and they'll make so much money.
Oh, they do. Yeah. The research is actually quite clear that a trait called agreeableness, which is actually quite opposite to narcissism. People who are agreeable are friendly, warm, open, gregarious, helpful to other people. They make significantly less income than people who are more antagonistic and narcissistic. Yeah. I mean, it costs you. Think about it. You know, like, oh, no, that's okay. You don't need to pay me for that. You know, that kind of thing. You're like the doctor who takes your payment in pies rather than money. You know, it's like that kind of thing.
Just a nice thank you will do.
And I will take a cherry pie from time to time.
You're not a narcissist. Can you still, though, be strict and successful and aggressive and make a ton of money and all these things without being a narcissist?
I'm not sure.
Even that answer is a really strong answer. You're not sure?
I'm not sure. I haven't seen much evidence of it. I've seen some people really, really make it, but even they'll acknowledge, I had to play a little bit of hardball. I had to put my needs way ahead of someone else and not stop to think how this may hurt them. I mean, there was definitely a relative empathy deficit compared to a far more agreeable person. I just don't say business by and large is a zero-sum game.
Yes.
And I think when you're working in a corporate structure and you're having to answer to folks like shareholders and they don't care about sort of the rank and file employee, that's when the game changed. I still think when you had company towns and the guy who ran the factory still knew of the lives of the others, there was a bit more empathy. That's kind of gone. You throw in other societal trends like social media where it's all about, who can sort of social comparison, who can look better, that kind of thing. It becomes more superficial. I think all of that is colluding that we don't value empathy anymore. We really, in fact, especially in boys and men, we're not teaching our boys to be empathic. We're actually saying empathy is a weakness in boys and men. And that's really one place we can really see a correction if we could do that. But we're actually going in the opposite direction. I mean, empathy has really kind of gone the way of the 8-track. Like not cool, not hip.
You said 1 to 3% of the population has been diagnosed with narcissistic personality disorder?
Yeah, that's what the research studies show. And you know what? I think we get caught up in people say, it's my boyfriend, it's my husband, it's my wife. When you really open that net to mothers and fathers, brothers and sisters, bosses and coworkers, aunts, uncles, you name it, you'll see, I actually don't know a single human being whose life hasn't really been touched by pathological narcissism. What's interesting is that for some people, it comes late in life. So they had great parents, nice husband, good friends, but then their sister marries a narcissist. And that's actually worse, like when your first encounter of it is when you're a full-blown adult, because then you really don't know what to do. It's like trying to learn to speak French when you're 50. Like, good luck with that.
Yeah.
So whereas others of us who've started early in this training, in fact, in this new book I'm writing, I say, who was your first narcissist? For some people, it was mom, like you met her on day one. For some folks, it was narcissist.
Because there's going to be
There's
one.
always a first.
Wow. For people who don't know who you are, why should they listen to you when it comes to narcissism?
They should listen to me because actually my way of coming into this area was through multiple pathways. The research in my lab at California State University, Los Angeles, we focused on personality disorders there. And narcissism was the one pattern where we saw it but wasn't behaving in a consistent manner. But at the same time, in my private practice, I was astounded at the number of people who were coming in and literally saying the same thing. And I'm like, okay, there's something going on here. And I really dug into it and said, these partners of them, they're all narcissistic people. And these people are so frustrated. They keep trying everything. Their partners don't change. They get up every day thinking and hoping it'll be different. It's not. It's devastating. And so then I did research into it. I'm like, wow, this is really not very treatable, the person with narcissistic personality disorder. And even the pattern really wasn't that changeable. And that just set me into a deep dive into the literature. I interviewed people all over the country, in fact, all over the world about their experiences with narcissistic husbands, wives, boyfriends, girlfriends. And then that culminated in my second book, which is called Should I Stay or Should I Go? Surviving a Relationship with a Narcissist. And then it was kind of off to the races from then. I think some things changed in our world and narcissism became more and more and more of a topic. And I'm surprised at how many smart people just don't get it. And it's such a pattern. I said, you should almost be reassured. A lot of people say narcissists are unpredictable. I said, unpredictable? They're the most predictable person in the room.
We know exactly what they'll do.
And that they say Jekyll Hyde. I said, Jekyll Hyde is kind of predictable. They're going to be mean and then they're going to be nice. So that's once you get that pattern into place and you know it and you know what you're dealing with, I think our problem is it's all about second chances that we give them. We're a little bit too heavy-handed with the forgiveness. And I'm hoping we can sort of help folks navigate those waters in a way that's healthy for them and their families.
So we know what people who are in a relationship with a narcissist or know a narcissist will get from this series.
Oh, yeah.
It's the hope, it's the education, it's actionable steps. If there is a narcissist out there who stumbles upon this video because everybody in their life has told them, you're a narcissist, and they have even a little bit of self-awareness, maybe I am, what do you think they will gain out of this series?
This has become the question of the year. Because I get emails almost every day from a person. Some of them are angry, some of them are downright threatening, and some of them are really contrite where they're saying, I'm this person, and I don't want to be this person anymore. And I've hurt people. Give me that person, and we might have a little hope. Now, here's the rub. A person, let's say a lifelong narcissist, they're 30, 40, 50 years old. This is how they've always treated people. It's a tough fix. It's almost like trying to take someone who's really sweet and making them mean. Not easy to do. It's the same thing. We're just trying to flip it out in the other direction, take a narcissist and turn them into someone who's more self-aware and kind. What you might see is that you might get some small fixes from them, but I do think all is not lost. I think if somebody is narcissistic and is willing to do the hard yards and put their head down, commit with a good therapist, really commit to mindfulness every day, you might get someone where you might get enough of a change where their family notices a difference. They may become a somewhat better parent. They might become a somewhat better partner. I mean, I think, are you ever going to make them the sweet, agreeable teddy bear? Probably not. I think what I see is when narcissists do enter treatment and become self-aware, the thing that they become self-aware of, and this is where it gets painful, is the emptiness and how insecure they really are. And that is one really tough look in the mirror. That's what they were avoiding all along. Yeah. That's why they're so grandiose. I don't want to see the emptiness. So when we strip away that veil, and I've worked with many clients where we finally got to the core of the insecurity, they actually became downright depressed.
Wow.
And that's what they were trying to avoid all along. So it's a very complex, nuanced, long-term treatment plan. But listen, if you're self-aware and you're like, I want to turn this around, I think that commitment is most of the variance. That's where it's at. I think something can be done. It's just a slow burn.
Dr. Ramani describes narcissism as the secondhand smoke of mental health. But why? And why is narcissism more dangerous than just being self-confident? What exactly narcissistic personality disorder is? Yeah. What is it?
Okay, all people with narcissistic personality disorder are obviously narcissistic, okay? Not all people who are narcissistic may have narcissistic personality disorder. So it's a fine point, but it's an important point since everybody's throwing this word around these days, right? You know, it's not, unlike other diagnoses that have different meaning to them. This is like a character assassination, right? So when we talk about narcissistic personality disorder, there's a long list of patterns, and they have to have 5 of the 9 on that list.
Yes.
It has to be something we call pervasive, meaning it cuts across situations with a variety of people, at work, at home. It's not just like they're narcissistic to only you and they're nice to everyone in the world. It tends to be pervasive. But here's the rub. It has to involve what we call social and occupational impairment and subjective distress. That's a fancy way of saying it is messing up that person's life. They're aware it's messing up their life and they're uncomfortable with it. And that's where you don't see as many people with narcissistic personality disorder. So if their style of not having empathy, of being entitled, of being grandiose, of being arrogant and superficial, and all that is working out for them, they're not going to walk around saying, I'm having a problem. They're not going to walk around saying, this is causing me problems. So if they don't acknowledge that piece of it, then really they're a narcissist, which is sort of a clinical term for being a jerk. And we don't get to diagnose people for being a jerk. We may not like them, but that's not a condition we diagnose. We diagnose people because they're bringing in something that they're uncomfortable with or that's causing them problems. The best example I can give you is, let's say somebody's been using drugs for 2 years and their drug use results in DUIs and other problems in their lives, okay? When that happens, they may themselves say, I don't have a problem with drugs, but I do have 5 DUIs and they did find me in the gutter and from my mom's house. So I guess, well, maybe there's a problem. In narcissism, they may recognize that, yeah, sure, I got in trouble at work and I was called out on this and that problem and I did cheat on my wife several times, but it's working out for me. Is that distress? He's being a jerk. So Dr. Dr. Francis is actually one of the architects of this diagnosis originally in the DSM. And he himself has come out very clearly and said, we don't get to diagnose somebody because we don't like them. That's not what this diagnosis is for. It's for somebody who's actually having discomfort and distress because they're behaving in this narcissistic manner. It's a fine point, but it's an important point. And here at Med Circle, I really want to be careful as we use these 2 terms because I think a lot of the listeners don't know if their friend, family member, or boss has the diagnosis and may never find out unless that other person, gets into treatment.
And their friend, family member, boss might just be a jerk.
They might be a jerk, and they may say, why should I go get a diagnosis? There's nothing wrong with me. And if they're walking around saying there's nothing wrong with me and I'm fine,
then according to the DSM, they're not.
They're not.
They're not they don't have NPD.
No, that's it. And that's where people get upset. I get emails every day. Will you talk to my husband and tell him he has narcissistic personality disorder? I'm like, no. Absolutely not.
Please, I would love to do that.
No win there. So that's a lot of the struggle here is that, and you know what? The pattern of narcissism, it's awful. They may be fine with it, but you as the recipient of that pattern, it's not, you're going to struggle with it. It's uncomfortable. It's one of those patterns that's really unhealthy for the people around it. I call it the secondhand smoke of psychiatry. Like being near a person who's narcissistic, it's as unhealthy as doing it yourself.
Whoa. That is a great metaphor. NPD is the secondhand smoke of psychiatry.
I'd say narcissism is the secondhand smoke of our time.
Of our time.
You stand close enough to it, you're going to get sick.
That's a huge deal for people because somebody might not get the diagnosis.
Yeah, they just
but they still have all these toxic behaviors that are affecting you.
Oh, absolutely. And you know what? In some ways, the diagnosis is irrelevant because all that's doing is saying the person's having problems because of it. But if they're lying, manipulating, exploiting, raging at you, who cares if they have a diagnosis? That's not good for you to be in the presence of. And then it takes us back to that more critical issues. Why are people like this? Or like this because they're insecure. And that makes people feel guilty. Well, if he's insecure and this is why he's doing this, and that's what we're going to have to get to the core of.
When does normal self-confidence cross the line into grandiosity?
Self-confidence is a healthy state. And people who are self-confident don't need to blast their achievements from every rooftop and every social media platform. People who are truly self-confident don't need to talk over other people and their achievement. People who are self-confident don't require their achievements to be front and center and ahead of everybody else's. People who are self-confident are so confident in their sense of self and their achievements that they actually can stay quiet about it.
In another video in this series, we'll talk about the different types of NPD, but I'll give everyone a preview from the original video we did, the communal narcissist.
The communal narcissist.
When you said it's that person who goes and volunteers on a Saturday but takes selfies the whole time in a full perfect face of makeup, I go, oh, I so know that person.
You know, and it's also the person who you say like, let's throw a gala. And you're like, but the gala's going to cost $10,000 and you're only going to make $500 for the charity. Why not just write the full $10,000 for the charity? Like, but I need the gala. They need galas. They need galas. They need parties. They need celebrations.
And you know what? I'm smiling when you say that because I think smiling is one of my coping mechanisms, by the way, like laughter and smiling, because these are very deep and heavy topics. Yeah, they're affecting a lot of everybody who's in a relationship with a narcissist.
Which is almost everybody.
And in a lot of cases, there are narcissists or people with NPD who are suffering.
If you want to get down to the core of it, they are suffering because they're deeply insecure. And that's where, but do they experience it as suffering? I'll tell you this, like I said, with the people with NPD or narcissism, where we start peeling back the layers, by the time you get down to layer 10 and you start looking in the gaping hole, it's not comfortable for them. Yeah. And your heart does ache for them because there's almost a childlike emptiness to them. I'm not saying I'd want to be in a relationship with them, though. I can tell you that right now. I mean, I can handle it for an hour at a time, but my God, for a person who actually has to live with that day in and day out, it's a nightmare.
Are there common co-occurring disorders with people with NPD?
People who have narcissistic personality disorder or even narcissistic traits, there are several co-occurring patterns we can see that are more likely to happen. All forms of substance use disorders. A lot of times it's to fill the emptiness or to enhance the grandiosity. So alcohol use, cocaine use, a stimulant use, that kind of thing. So you'll see some of that. Depression. Interestingly, narcissism and depression can hang out together. A lot of it is that insecurity and that emptiness. It's not unusual to see those two kind of hanging out together.
But are they getting diagnosed with depression?
Sometimes they're getting diagnosed with depression because they might be very irritable. We'll see that in men. What will happen is you'll sometimes confuse the two as well, because a type of narcissism we're going to be talking about today is called covert narcissism. People who are covert narcissists, they're a little bit like Eeyore from Winnie the Pooh. It's like, woe is me, no one understands me, how come the world is so unfair to me? And they seem so downtrodden that they look depressed. Yeah. And then all of us will treat them as though they're depressed, and we're making absolutely no headway. And then one day you dawns on you, you're like, oh, this isn't depression at all. So actually, quite frankly, we'll often treat the we'll think they're depressed before we'll think they're narcissistic.
Wrongly so.
But wrongly so.
Yeah. Again, just highlighting how important it is to get the right diagnosis.
It really is, because these personality patterns also make treating other mental health conditions. For example, it's not unusual for narcissism to also be found coexisting with bipolar disorder, which is also a very messy kind of issue to treat, because the grandiosity of the mania and the grandiosity of the narcissism often collide. So you'll see that too.
Yeah.
And when I've worked with families of when they have adult children who are substance abusers, and the adult child goes into rehab, I'll also know that adult child has narcissism, and I'll ache for them, because they're thinking their child's going to go to rehab, not only come out sober, but sweet. They come out sober, but they're still as irritable, invalidating, sort of mean as they always were. That part's not going to go away. That's the narcissism.
Maybe even more so?
Even more so. And you see this a lot in substance abuse treatment circles, that you see a lot of it together. Yes, exactly, because the substance use was sort of helping them kind of shore up their defenses.
Yeah.
And so it can make treatment much, much more complicated. You'll also see a greater likelihood of, for example, like patterns that are sometimes labeled love and sex addiction, kinds of like compulsive sexuality, compulsive like relationship patterns. You'll see that coexisting with narcissism as well. It just makes everything that much harder to treat.
Yes.
That's what it is, because you don't tend to get as much emotion. There's a lot more defensiveness. I know more than the doctor. There is a lack of empathy. There's a lot of projection. All this stuff really makes it hard to do really deep psychotherapy with somebody.
How many different types of NPD are there?
Well, there's different kinds of narcissism.
Okay.
Whether those translate into subtypes of narcissistic personality disorder. I once said there's 9 possible symptoms of narcissistic personality disorder, which means there's thousands and thousands of possible combinations.
Right.
But if we were really to look at it in 5 patterns that I've sort of broken down in my book, and this is based on the theoretical work on narcissism, drawing from other people's work, when we talk about the types of narcissism, they're not really subtypes of narcissistic personality disorder, but there are different kinds of patterns we see of narcissism. And I think it's important to see the differences, because it shows us this doesn't look the same across everyone. And then some people say, well, that's not narcissism. The person I know acts like this. And I'll say, but it's a similar pattern. Let's get down to the brass tacks of what all narcissists look like. In all narcissism, we tend to see a lack of empathy, grandiosity, entitlement, superficiality, chronic seeking of validation outside of them, arrogance, and a real tendency towards rage, as well as a tendency to manipulate or exploit other people. Those you tend to see across the board to varying degrees. So let's start at the top with what I consider the most severe and problematic narcissistic pattern, and that's the malignant or the toxic narcissist. These are the folks that almost look like psychopaths. They'll exploit other people, they take advantage of other people, they lie, they cheat, they work the system to their advantage. They can often be quite successful. You might wonder, why am I not calling them psychopaths? They can sometimes feel remorse for what they're doing. They're like, this isn't cool, but I just got to get this part done and then I'll make it right. Whereas a psychopath wouldn't need to make it right. So there's just a really manipulative, mean-spirited edge to them that can be very unsettling. But when you first meet them, they're extraordinarily charming, extraordinarily charismatic, confident, successful. So that's sort of your malignant, toxic type. You'll often see these folks running big companies, at the heads of government, all of that. Like they really know how to work a system.
Wow.
The next in the group is what I call sort of your classical grandiose narcissist. And that's what most of us think of. The person who's braggy, who really is entitled, I'm special, I deserve special treatment. It's almost like your celebrity narcissist. That's what your grandiose narcissist. They brag a lot, they show off a lot. Look at my new car, look at my new this, look at my new girlfriend. It's a lot of show and tell. They suck all the oxygen out of the room, all the usual traits, but they don't tend to be as exploitative and as mean as a malignant narcissist, but they are sort of your classical kind of narcissist. The next narcissist on the list, and this is probably the most mysterious one and maybe the most revealing to MedCircle listeners, is the covert or vulnerable narcissist. These are the woe is me narcissist. If the world could see how great I am, I'd be one of the great ones. But nobody gets me because I'm ahead of my time. And so you'll often find them sort of at home, huddled over their computer, being like a troll or like coming up with their next big plan. But they almost have a failure to launch a lot of the time. They can often look depressed. They seem vulnerable because they almost feel like the world doesn't get them. They're hypersensitive to criticism. But they lack empathy, and they can be very entitled. Like, I deserve special treatment because, the world doesn't know this, but I'm the best.
What's interesting about that is I listened to that, and when you would first meet somebody like that, you think, oh, they just have low self-esteem.
Yeah, bingo.
But all narcissists have low self-esteem,
bingo,
right?
exactly.
That's why they're doing that.
Exactly. So the covert narcissists, they lead with that, but it's almost like they feel like they have this sort of strange, I always say that the covert narcissist has this sort of weird pause. They'll say, yeah, I went to that college, but I guess nobody cares. And they'll do that weird thing, like, okay, well, that's a little bit of a strange pause, but they're like, yeah, I already read that book, but why would you care? It's like one of those. It's like,
wow.
There's a little bit. There's an edge. It's almost like you're sticking your hand into a bucket of barbed wire. It doesn't feel good. It's like,
but even with those examples, even though they were just random examples, I still feel the pain for that person.
Oh, they feel the world pass them by.
Yeah, but I don't feel the same way with a grandiose narcissist.
You won't as much, no.
Yeah.
The covert narcissists, though, ultimately will get to the point where they feel the world owes them something. The world owes me. And there'll be a real edge to them, because they seem really sad, and you'll often try to help them, and you'll wonder why they're so ungrateful. Well, that's why that can feel really uncomfortable for other people who are so sympathetic to them and wonder, why are they not ever saying thank you or recognizing all we did?
Yeah.
Now, number 4 is the communal narcissist. The communal narcissist can be very confusing because they're out there volunteering and flying all over the world and doing their own personal rescue missions. And, after every hurricane, they're posting online hurricane goals, #hurricane goals. And like, let's all raise enough money and let's send lots of stuff to animals.
They're the hashtag narcissists.
They're the hashtag narcissists.
Yeah.
But they're like, it's all about their goals for helping the world. And like, you'll see them, you know about animal rescue people, like they're always holding their rescue dogs, but then they go home and they're really mean to their husband.
Yeah.
They love going to galas and they want buildings named after them. And if they do give a donation, they have to hold 20 gold shovels and have lots of pictures taken. Like, it's all about they do all these things to get validation. That's their tool for getting validation. Are often really unkind to the people, their immediate family, or the people who work under them. They can be absolutely awful to them. And people say, oh my gosh, you're so lucky you work with him. He's so charitable. And the people are just like, oh no, this is really
that's one of
nice.
many characteristics he is.
So the communal narcissist is it takes a while to sort of to peel off that layer, and then to sort of, that's why I always say, pay attention to how a person treats the person who don't have as much power as them in that situation, because that's going to teach you a lot. So they'll be really sweet to the recipient of the charitable dollars, but really mean to the person who's working with them, and that doesn't add up. The last narcissist is sort of kind of a good nature. I'm going to call them the benign narcissist. The benign narcissist is like this sort of clueless, uninsightful person who just says really vapid things, very superficial, only cares like, all I want is like a fast car, and you're driving a piece of junk. Like, they'll be very dismissive of other people.
This sounds like every 16-year-old I've ever met.
In many ways, there's an adolescence, there's an immaturity, but they really aren't that mean-spirited, and you can actually kind of say, that's not a nice thing to say, and they're like, well, yeah, I guess so, but then they'll go back and say it the next day. I always say it's nice to have a few benign narcissists on deck because they're fun to have at a party. Like, just keep them on that list, but never turn to them at a time of need.
Just because I'm curious, and I get to ask questions, which, somebody put me in charge to do this. Who would you most want to be in a relationship with? If
those are
were
my
the
5.
Those are your 5.
Oh, mama, and just solitude and in a cabin isn't enough. Because I'm going to take, if solitude in a cabin is my option, I'm going with that one.
Okay, so it's not an option.
I don't think any of those are a good
you have to choose one.
You have to choose one?
You have to choose one.
I might choose the communal narcissist and just be glad they're doing nice things for other
That
people.
was my
Hope
choice.
to God they're nice to me.
Yeah.
But I have to tell you, that can be exhausting because when the whole world is saying, you're so lucky, he's so charitable.
Right.
You're like, oh my gosh, she hasn't said something nice to me in 15 years. They're all painful. Maybe the benign one, but even that, you feel like you're forever in a relationship with your high school boyfriend.
Right.
That's not nice.
Right.
So if the cabin by myself for the rest of my life isn't a possibility, I'm going communal.
I get it.
With therapy.
I can have a cabin from you like 2 acres away. And then we can just meet when we want to hang out.
I don't recommend any of these types for a relationship.
But what about my idea for I'll have a cabin 1 acre away from yours?
That I'll do that.
Okay, because you were shaking your head no like this. I was like, wow.
You might be a narcissist, so we have to be aware.
Let's wait till after my therapy session.
Before I take you as my neighbor.
If you don't know what we're talking about, go see the previous episode. Okay, out of those 5 types, is there one that's most common?
I would have to say probably the grandiose, the classical narcissist.
Okay,
yeah,
so that's why we
classical.
think of it because it is the most common.
That's it.
Okay. Mm-hmm. What am I not asking you about narcissistic personality disorder as it is defined from understanding it that I need to be asking?
You know, all the patterns I gave you are what you see are the 9 characteristics that a diagnostic manual like the DSM would require. What's really interesting is that our diagnostic manuals are now taking sort of a new direction in how we think about these personality patterns. And in the most, I mean, not to put too kind of bookish a point on it, but the DSM now views narcissism and all of the personality disorders through a new kind of a lens. And it looks at, for example, how a person views their own identity. And the narcissist's identity is very much caught up in how they're viewed by other people. So they don't have a core sense of self. Their sense of self is governed entirely by the world outside of them. That's actually a terrifying feeling. Like the only way I'm good is if everyone tells me I'm good today. That's very unstable.
Right.
We also look at goal setting. How do they set their goals? And narcissists set their goal in a way that will get them approval from the world. So either they set their goals unrealistically high so they can talk about the big goals they have, which they're never going to meet, or they set their goals a little too low so they know they're always going to surpass them. So, but no matter what, their goal setting, once again, is based on how they can talk to the world about these things. Then when we look at other areas, we look at empathy and their lack thereof. So now DSM is looking at this across all personality patterns, and people with narcissism don't have empathy. They look at people as existing to serve their needs. What can you do for me? And then I'll make a relationship with you. So that's why a lot of people say, but that narcissistic guy was really nice to me. I'm like, yeah, because he needed you as a sales contact.
Yeah.
And they're like, oh. Or they like the fact that you live in the right neighborhood in town. There's a need being served. And then finally, DSM is looking at narcissism through the lens of intimacy. And that's one thing that narcissists are not good at. They're not good at intimacy. They're not good at close relationships. By and large, their relationships are superficial and are really engaged in for personal gain. So they might get a very attractive partner because that makes them look good to the world. They might get a wealthy partner because that will make sure they have lots of money. They might get a famous partner so that they look good to the world. I mean, the characteristics on which they choose the partner are deeply, deeply superficial. And so that's how a narcissist chooses. And so when we look at those areas, self, goal setting, empathy, and intimacy, that's another way to view narcissism. No matter what, it's just really it comes down to that core insecurity, that sense they cannot regulate themselves from the inside out, that they don't have a good sense of identity, and that they're really reliant on the world for telling them what they're about, which makes them actually quite resentful.
A recent study suggests that 1 in 16 Americans has been affected by someone with narcissistic personality disorder. So what causes NPD, and can it be unlearned? What causes narcissism?
There's actually a lot of pathways to this, and the city of Oz that we call narcissism. There's a lot of ways you get there. A lot of people, the big question everyone has is, are you born this way or are you made? It's mostly made, but there's a little bit of born. And
what's the percentage on that?
If I were to spitball, I'm going to go with like an 80-20 or a 90-10 in terms of made versus born. I mean, the inborn part is that, because the fact of the matter is, we see people come from invalidating early environments or overindulged or spoiled early environments, and they don't turn out narcissistic. So there's got to be something else at play, right? And that's probably where that temperamental piece comes in. Kids who are likely more hypersensitive, hyper-emotional. If you look at Marsha Linehan's work on borderline personality disorder, she actually talks about that mix between the biological vulnerability plus the invalidation of the early environment. There's likely something like that happening in narcissism too, but it's mostly made. So let's view it as almost concentric circles, and let's start at the middle circle, which is really what happens in the family when the child is first growing up. Children children who don't get consistent emotional mirroring from their parents, that's a setup for becoming a narcissist later on. Because that's how children learn to regulate their emotional worlds. They learn how to self-soothe their emotions. They learn how to take responsibility for their emotions. They learn how to understand their emotions from how they're mirrored by their parents. And if their parents have consistent, appropriate reactions and are available to them, that's how the child learns that. So if a child, for any number of reasons, doesn't have that kind of consistent feedback from their parents, the parents are distracted, the parents are absent, the parents don't care, the parents are addicted to drugs and are not available in that way, all of those could be contributors to that. Parents just are abusive in some way. Obviously, that can be a contributor too to inconsistent kinds of mirroring. And then the child doesn't learn, like I said, to sort of regulate their own emotion. They keep looking to the environment for validation because frankly, they're confused. We also think about narcissism in the early environment as a function of attachment. Children who have secure, healthy attachments tend to go on to adulthood and make more secure, healthy attachments. But kids who have more anxious or avoidant attachments, that can set the tone for attachment issues in adulthood, and they're not able to make those kinds of successful attachments in adulthood. So their relationships are really fraught with lots of in and out, back and forth, rather than the consistency you'd see from a secure attachment with a parent. The other thing I often say is that parents who create narcissistic kids who go on to become narcissistic adults, we see a pattern of simultaneous overindulgence and underindulgence. And what I mean by that is these are the kids where if they do the sport their parent wants, or get the straight A's, or the prima ballerina dancer, or whatever it is they do, the best violin player, whatever, or they want to take over dad's business, whatever the thing they say they want to do, if the parents can get a good public face from it, they will overindulge the kid in that way. They'll drive them to every practice. They'll go out of their way. But when that child has an emotional need that needs to be met, the parents are nowhere to be found. Like they're interested when their kid's on stage, they're interested when their kid's on the field, they're interested when the child's getting an honor or doing what they want them to do. But when that kid really needs their emotional needs to be met, it's completely an impoverished environment. That's what I mean by being over and underindulged. It's also what we call modeling. It's what they see in their environment. If they watch a parent constantly be entitled, they're going to learn to be entitled. If they watch a parent who has no empathy, they're not going to learn empathy. Empathy is learned in childhood. You cannot teach a 30-year-old how to be empathic. That's an early game.
So that was my question, because if you were saying that 80 to 90% of becoming a narcissist was taught, then certainly later we could unteach it. But we can't.
No, because you know what ends up happening is that ultimately these environments for children are inconsistent. They're invalidating. At the worst of it, they can be abusive and dehumanizing.
Right.
And that's the heartbreak, is that I've worked with more than a few folks who are adult narcissists who did come from abusive, invalidating, downright dehumanizing
who have
homes.
Narcissistic personality disorder.
Who have narcissistic personality disorder. So their early lives were really, really sort of wretched. And that's heartbreaking, but that's still not a get out of jail free card for treating other people badly. Like I'm not down with that. And so, but now let's take that. Now we're in the family, but we got to push this out a little bit. Society is to blame too. We tell kids it's okay at some level to behave. As long as you win, you got into Harvard Junior, great, whatever it took to get there. As long as we start saying that you can shelve important qualities like compassion, kindness, respect, mutuality, empathy. As long as you're telling people it's okay to put that stuff away, as long as you succeed, our achievement-oriented culture is a contributor to these patterns for sure. Because we're almost saying empathy is a waste of time as long as you get straight A's. You know, who needs kindness when you can write code? That's not gonna fly. You know, so that's the other reason we're seeing more and more of this. And then you add things like social media and the kinds of things society values into the mix, then that's it. I mean, it's a perfect storm. That's what I'm saying. You got the family, you've got the community, you've got the culture at large, and then you have a little bit of individual temperament thrown in there. Forget about it.
When you hear how narcissism is conditioned, I'm surprised that it's only 1 to 3% of the population that has it.
Remember, that's narcissistic personality disorder,
right,
which requires that person to have had problems in their life because of it, awareness of it, and feel like it's caused them trouble.
Yeah.
Because narcissism works as a pattern in our society too often, they don't feel a lot of distress.
So when you were talking about parents mirroring, or kids mirroring their parents, there are certain behaviors that I grew up with, right, and my parents, that I did until my mid-20s, and then I thought, I'm not going to do this anymore. This is not healthy for me. It's not nice. I'm not going to do it. And so I changed. So why is it that I can change an undesirable behavior, but someone who has narcissistic personality disorder can't change?
Because the core conflict is that insecurity, that discomfort with themselves, that sense of emptiness. That's what has to be addressed. So you may have seen that, but it clearly didn't result in that kind of core insecurity perhaps in you. So when you were doing the yelling, it's like, well, this is how it's done. And you're like, whoa, maybe this other person feels sad when I'm yelling at them. This isn't okay. So you were able to have that correction because A, you were able to engage in empathy, and B, you may not have had that core insecurity. Remember, the narcissist is absolutely reliant on the world for validation at all times. When we need someone, we resent them. You know, a child doesn't, but the child grows. You think about an adolescent. Every adolescent out there resents their parents. Why do they resent their parents? Because they kind of still need them.
Yeah.
They kind of still need them to be a mom, but like, I want you to be my mom. I don't want you to be my mom. And they go back and forth, and then they hate you. You know, so it's that resentment comes from need. And it's one thing to be 5. Of course you need your parents. That's built in. But when you're 35, 45, and you need people to tell you you're great all the time, you may not be aware of that need, but you are aware that you're reliant on the world. And that if you're having a bad day, that the only way to spring out of it is to get validation from the world. That stinks. So that's why it's very difficult to change. It's not just about modeling empathy. And there is an interesting concept out there, and it's something actually even in my social media, someone that we've engaged on about this idea of cognitive empathy. You can teach people, like, that's how he feels. Okay, got it. Do you understand why that would feel bad? Got it. That's almost intellectualized, and it's a little bit different than being in the emotional muck with someone.
Is it like acting?
It's not. No, it's not acting. It's knowing, but it's not getting. You see what I'm saying?
No, I
know why this person would feel upset right now. I know that.
Yeah.
Might even get it a little bit, but I'm not feeling it so much so that it'll stop my behavior in the future.
Right.
So it's like a half of a fix. And when you're really in a close, intimate relationship with someone, and the best they can come up with is like, I suppose I understand why you feel that way, but they're still not like, and they're not emotionally there with you. That's incredibly unsatisfying.
It's kind of like when somebody says, well, I'm sorry if you feel that way.
Yes, narcissist mantra.
Yeah.
I'm sorry you feel that way.
That's not an apology.
That's not an apology, exactly.
You have been in a relationship with a narcissist?
Myself, yes, of course.
Okay.
In different areas too. Intimate relationships, familial relationships, work relationships, but just so all of Med Circle knows, it's not my ex-husband. He's actually a great guy.
We love the ex-husband.
Yeah, we love my ex-husband.
So, because I'm curious, because if 80 to 90% is taught, were you hyper aware raising your kids to not raise a narcissist?
My ex-husband and I, when we were raising our kids, the one thing we 100% agreed upon, he's like, Ramani, we have a lot of things we have to get right, but we looked at each other and said, the one thing we must make sure we focus on above all else, because we only get one chance to get this right, is empathy. We didn't care how they did in school. We didn't care if they didn't eat their vegetables. We didn't care if they watched television 10 hours a day. We just needed them to be empathic. And there was that fine day when they were about 8 or 9 years old. I'm like, no, we got it.
Hold on, I have so many questions. Was your ex-husband a mental health professional? Yeah. Okay, so you have...
Yeah, it's not like...
these kids have two world-renowned mental health experts parenting them, and the two of you both agreed that empathy was number one.
Empathy is everything.
This is huge for parents to get.
It's huge, because I'll tell you, it's the core of why kids bully. All the problems we have with kids, it has to be about empathy. Am I telling you my kids have had the most smooth ride? No one's kids are. I mean, and they're horribly mean to me because they're teenagers. But I will say that I can see in their face when they go one line too far as a teenager and they say that one mean thing and they see my face change, immediately the empathy overtakes them quicker than their words do. Their face changes. I've watched my daughters interact with people, and I'll watch how quickly their face will change when they sense another human being in need. And at those points, I do heave that sigh of relief. Whatever path they take, I do know that they're hyper aware of, not hyper aware like in a neurotic way, but they're very aware of the needs and the feelings of other people, and they will shape their behavior in that way. And that was the only thing that mattered, because I wanted to put two decent, kind human beings into the world.
That's really beautiful. I bet if I lined up 100 parents and asked them, if you could only give your kid one thing, what would it be? I don't think one of them would say empathy.
That's terrible, because I'll tell you, the world has enough smart people, and it turns out they do well in school, but if I had to choose, if somebody said, you could give up your kid getting into like a top college or something and trade that out for empathy, I'd be like, hell no.
Empathy.
She could go, I don't care what she does, but I would not let her give that up.
Because parents are concerned they're sharing, kindness, being honest, diligent, hardworking. I've never heard empathy.
Yeah, it was everything, the way I raised them. In fact, even how I breastfed my kids, I'm like, I'm going to stare at them face to face. I'm never going to be distracted as much as I can. In the middle of the night, I would fall asleep. Yeah. I would stare at them face to face. Like, I started that one early. I'm like, I'm mirroring these kids.
That was that important to you and your husband?
It was that important to me. It was that important.
Guys, this is huge for the parents out there getting that, because this is the leading expert on narcissism and a lot of other mental health topics, and her ex-husband both have that shared goal.
Yeah,
that
it had to be narcissism. I mean, it had to be,
right.
It had to be empathy for us, because I think that's the pay it forward. That's going to make them better mothers. It's going to make them better partners. It's going to make them better workers. It's going to make them better leaders. It's going to make them better friends. They win everywhere on that one. That's the only quality to me that matters in a human being. And so from there, all other things would be built out, whatever they do.
Now, you briefly mentioned that around the age of 8 or 9, there was a moment that you said, they got it. What was that?
I was actually watching my daughter play with another child, and then something happened with what the child was eating or interacting with, and so that child no longer had that thing, and my daughter still had it. It might have been like ice cream or something fell out of a dish.
Oh, okay.
And her face, you could see that she experienced that child's feeling before that child experienced their feeling. And you could see the hurt in her face. And then she's like, we have to help them. And I'm like, oh, sweetie, don't worry about it. I think she was worried about the cost. And she was even being empathic. She knew I was struggling a little financially at that point, and to buy another ice cream was going to cost money. And she's like, is it going to be okay to get them another? I said, of course, sweetheart. And then we ameliorated the situation and got a new ice cream. But her caring for me having enough money, that child suffering, it was like, it really, and she was to me like, should I cut mine in half? But I already put my germs in it. The way a kid thinks. Yeah. It was absolutely automatic for her. And, and we were very lucky. Our children went to an infant care center, actually at UCLA, where empathy was the main thing taught to them all day long. So you can build this into caregiving models of, and I think that started in infant care. It was in their preschools. It was in their K through, maybe high school. It gets harder. But it's, we'll see how it goes for them. Like I said, as teenagers, it doesn't always feel like empathy, but I see it with their friends. Everyone but me. And I'm fine with that.
For now. Yeah. They'll become your friends later. So 8 or 9 years old, you saw these empathetic traits.
Even earlier, but then it was clicked in. It was automatic for them. Yeah.
When do people start to exhibit signs of narcissism?
Here's where we need to be careful. Almost by definition, all teenagers look narcissistic.
Yes.
They're deeply entitled.
Of course.
They're arrogant. They think they know everything.
What's the type of narcissist I compared them to?
You would call them maybe more the benign narcissist.
The benign narcissist.
Yeah. And I think that's what it is. It is more of the benign narcissism. And I think that's why I'd be very loath to use that term within adolescents. I always say that adolescence is like wearing a sweater that's way too big for them. They're just growing into their personalities. They're trying to figure it all out. Their bodies are changing. The world treats them like an adult for 1 hour, as a child for another hour.
Totally.
So it's just hard to be a teenager. Yeah. It really, really is. Yeah. And it's hard to interact with a teenager. So that combination means like we're just trying to put a label on it all. So I say don't even use that word with adolescents, even though the pattern seems to fit. I wouldn't start really sort of saying, this pattern's making me super uncomfortable, probably until their early 20s. Like it's really in place and they haven't kind of grown out of it, whether they've gone to college or military service or like trained in a job or something. Some of that should be correcting at that point. And that's where I would really, really look for it in earnest. But I would still look for some of the key issues, that they are empathic as adolescents when they need to be. They may not be to the parents, but they should be with their friends and other folks in their purview. Are they really entitled? Do they really believe they deserve special treatment? Or, kids making noise in a restaurant, sure, that's going to happen. But like a kid walking up and saying, hey, why should I have to wait in line? I'm too important. Yeah. That's the problem.
Yeah. All right. Well, that was such a wonderful explanation of causes. And there are 7 signs to look out for when spotting a narcissist. We're going to go through those one by one. What's the first one?
So the first one's lack of empathy. Okay. And that's a defining characteristic that's a defining characteristic of narcissism. In fact, if I see that somebody has really well-preserved empathy, I'm like, nah, not even happening. So that to me almost is the requirement. It's the bedrock of this pattern. The second is entitlement. Entitlement is that sense is that somehow someone should deserve special treatment, even if it's to the detriment of other people, that somehow they are different than everyone else. Again, sort of special by dint of their existence.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
The third is grandiosity. It's sort of an unrealistic assessment of one's capacity or abilities, or they talk about a grandiose world that they don't even live in, the things that they may someday do. You know, someday I'm going to climb Mount Everest. So they talk about it as though it's something they're actively doing or have already done. So it is, again, a very unrealistic, almost fantasy-like version of the world. They'll often talk about having one day the greatest love affair or the greatest love story or the greatest wedding or the greatest career. Everything is just bigger and larger than life. Number 4 is superficiality. There's a very vapid quality to narcissism. They're really only concerned about appearances, how a person looks, what a person owns, where they live, what they drive, what they carry, the shoes on their feet. It's very, very superficial to the detriment of other characteristics. Somebody out there might say, oh, but I love fashion, but they're a very sweet, kind person. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about superficiality with absolutely no depth behind it, or judging people solely on superficial characteristics and quality. Number 5 is chronic seeking of admiration or validation. It's the constant need to be receiving praise, recognition, and nowadays that's really amped up because of social media, that they have to get likes and they have to get lots of traction on their social media page and they need lots of followers and all of that. So it's that constant need, but it never stops. If you're even close to them, like you're their child or you're their partner, you have to constantly be telling them how wonderful they are and how great they are, and way beyond the thing that they've done. It's almost a nuisance to get a gift from a narcissist because you have to thank them for it so many times. It would have been easier to buy it yourself. Number 6 is their tendency to rage. They don't have good command of their emotions. They tend to be all over the map. And the one emotion they tend to manifest the most often is uncontrolled rage. That's often because they're so frustrated and they're so insecure and they don't have good ways of dealing with their feelings. So it's not unusual for them to just come out. When things don't go their way, they don't have any tolerance for frustration. So you'll see a lot of rage that comes out. And number 7, I'd really say, is arrogance. It's, I'm better than you. And in some ways that sort of draws from the grandiosity, it draws from the entitlement, but it can come off as a snobbery, as a dismissiveness, as a devaluation, as an invalidation of other people, just sort of like sweeping them away. And so those are some of the 7 key characteristics. In my book, I actually lay out what I call 31 characteristics. Oh. It's like, I think it's a lot more than just the 7, and it takes in a lot more territory. Jealousy, envy, getting pleasure out of other people's misery, lying, cheating, things, a lot of really negative interpersonal patterns. People who are narcissistic often engage in projection. They make their faults and flaws yours. Like, I didn't say that, I didn't do that, you did. They'll accuse you of something they did, and they'll be, you'll often be quite confused. They engage in dynamics like gaslighting, where they question your reality and make you feel like you're literally losing your mind. Like, that never they'll say things like, that never happened, and you'll be, but it did. And then you'll start questioning yourself.
Did that happen? Right.
And people who spend enough time with narcissists find themselves plagued with self-doubt because narcissists so often question their reality.
So with those 7, do they have to have all 7 of those?
The DSM has a list of 9, which takes in most of those. You only need 5 of the 9, plus this idea that life isn't going well, that distress, to get it in the DSM. I'm actually a little more generous. I say, like, you need to have, like, if you have 5 of those 7, you're in trouble. But the lack of empathy is the requirement. Yeah. To me, everything. So it's like that plus 4 or 5 others, and not so good.
And huge takeaway for me was in our last episode when you talk about empathy and how it related to raising your kids. So if you haven't seen that episode, make sure you go back one and take a look there, because that was just absolutely, for me, phenomenal. How quickly, if I'm just at a party and I meet people, can I find out if someone's a narcissist?
I mean, I'm a pro, and I'm in and out in 15 seconds. Like, I got this.
15 seconds.
I got this. Like, before I even got to the second bite of the pretzel.
Our session is going to be 15 seconds.
You can, you know what it is, at a party, it's almost easier, right? Because, I know it's kind of mean. I probably, like, cast out a few. It might take me longer. Some people, if they're a narcissist, you're going to be able to tell quickly. Sometimes it takes you a little longer if it's a bit more subtle or covert or something like that. But it can happen pretty quickly. You know, watch the back and forth of the conversation. Is there a genuine curiousness about you? Like, do you walk up to them and say, "Hi, nice to meet you, I'm Ramani," and you'll say, "Hi, I'm Kyle," and then it's the Kyle show. And by the time this conversation is done, there's no sense of anything about me, and not even an opportunity for me to have offered that. You know, it also might be how they conduct themselves in that. Like, do they just keep talking about themselves and only in these sort of unrealistically glowing terms? Do they almost seem too, but at the other extreme, they also may be a little bit too slick and too smooth, like, you know, maybe not like they're coming on to you, but like it's just almost too charming. Yeah. I find charming people terrifying, because I know that's often like the soft sign that psychopathy or narcissism's coming around the corner. So charming people, I actually like uncharming people. Like, the more socially awkward you are, the more I'm like, this could be a real, sure thing.
Real person.
Like, this is great.
Yeah.
Wonderful. Sign me up.
So if I meet somebody and I suspect they're a narcissist because they're only talking about themselves, they're not interested in me at all, they're very grandiose in their the content that they're putting out there, are there any questions I could ask them that could give me some instant feedback?
You know, what you can do is ask them something that has more, that pulls them away from talking about their work. Like, let's say they're bragging about work. They're sort of like only talking about one thing. Try to change it to something else. Like, what are the things that bring you joy? Like, really ask them like a feely question. And then if they're like, blah, 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 like, they just sort of like become like, huh? Feeling? I'm going to go get another martini. Like, they run away. That's probably a sign. Like, it's sort of a game for me at a party. If I think I've met a narcissist, I'll say, "Can you tell me a little bit about your inner world?"
Yeah.
Because I know what you do now. And I'll often get people who look at me like I'm speaking in tongues, and they'll often say, "I see someone over there. I gotta go." And they'll often really cut the conversation.
People are going to be so nervous when they meet you at a party now. They're like, "Hey, by the way, I'm not a narcissist. I saw you on Med Circle."
Like, I'm out. I'm not.
That's also a show I would definitely watch. You with a hidden camera, just meeting
at a
people.
Party. Yeah. In LA, it's actually it's blood sport here,
because it's like it's fishing with dynamite.
Well, it's like
here.
It's like seashell collecting.
Yeah.
By the end of a party, you've got like enough.
I mean, it really, I know we joke about how narcissistic LA is, but it really is true.
It really is true.
Yeah, we live here, we work here. It's insanity.
It really is.
Yeah.
But here's one thing that you want to be, I mean, again, I don't want people dismissing people in like the first 15 seconds they meet them. Let's say someone does talk about themselves a lot. The other thing you do want to be mindful of is they may be socially anxious. So they may have trouble kind of taking and rolling with it. That's why I'm saying, if you could slow the conversation down, maybe even make it about something that's happening around you, like something very sweet, like something that, you know, they're drinking or something special they may be wearing, but making them make it more special, not like, well, this is the designer label, but try to make it about the moment, what's personal, and see where they can go with it, to share a little of yourself. Also, start talking about yourself a little. They've done their whole dog and pony show. See what happens when you start talking about yourself. If they glaze over or they start using their phone at that point, not a good sign.
If I do find myself in a situation where I'm in a relationship, whether it's romantic or otherwise, with a narcissist, what can I do?
Well, that's, you know, here it's gonna be painful. If you really, and by the time a lot of people detect these patterns, it's been years sometimes. If we're lucky, they don't have kids together, because that can start getting messy if the relationship goes south. Because a custody battle with a narcissist it's war. It's one of the most painful things I've ever witnessed. If you sense that that's where things are going, you need to get yourself into therapy right away, and you want to get the couple into therapy. The challenge with couples therapy with a narcissist is, unless you've got one very skilled therapist, that narcissist can really play the therapist. Yeah, and I've seen that happen many, many times. You want to be really, really careful.
How do they play the therapist?
They win them over, they charm them. And sometimes the narcissist is sort of the more materially successful or the more successful seeming partner, and they'll kind of, again, they'll charm them. They'll charm them. You have to be somebody who just dislikes charm to really not be charmed, right? So they'll really play them and work them and flatter them. And narcissists actually are quite good at sort of sniffing out how to validate another person, because they need it so much. They're really good at dispensing it when they need to.
Wow.
So they can really work the game. But it's important you get therapy, you consider getting yourselves into therapy, you pay attention to the patterns, and you really have to do some hard looks into the mirror on if this is as good as it's ever going to get, which is probably the case, can you live with this forever? That's the question. And if you don't like that, then you've got one of two paths. Either you've got to adjust your expectations, this is how it's always going to be, or you got to get out.
Well, and those two paths is what we will be discussing next. You mentioned to me off camera that there are people in a relationship with a narcissist, and they don't even really realize that they're being abused.
Yeah.
Explain that.
There's a couple of reasons that could happen. One is what I call sort of the historical reason. They may have come from a family where one or both parents or someone significant in a family system was narcissistic or abusive. So for them, abuse and relationships go together.
Went back to the mirroring thing.
Right, so they just don't even, everyone's gonna, this is all I deserve, this is how I'm treated. And so they're often an easy mark for getting in with a narcissist, whereas other people might have already broken up with the narcissist they end up with. They stick it out because it's almost this sense of they were sort of raised up in that. And so they don't even think they deserve more, or they just don't question it. And so they're used to saying, well, maybe if I try harder, they'll love me. Maybe if I try harder. So it becomes a sense of, it's a self-blame, the self-reproach. This is my fault. They're telling me that they're yelling at me because I didn't keep the house clean, or I don't look good, or the kids were noisy, or I don't make enough money, or I'm out of the house too much, or whatever the reasons are. And they actually blame themselves. Keep thinking, if I fix this, this, and this, then maybe this will turn around.
In what types of relationships do you find narcissism a problem the most?
I would say listen, the two sets of relationships where I think it is most problematic is in an intimate partnership, like a husband-wife, boyfriend-girlfriend kind of thing, or a parental relationship when it is your parent. Because the parental relationship is, if you have a narcissistic mother or father, or perhaps step-parent, that sets a tone that you're going to take into adulthood. And it's going to color how you choose a partner, what you endure in a job. Your own sense of self-worth. So many things in the long term can get harmed by having a narcissistic parent. It's by no means a sentence, and I've seen many people who've had brutally narcissistic parents who go on to joyful lives. So it's not like you're doomed, but it definitely is a vulnerability. Then in the flip side is obviously when you meet someone and you believe you've fallen in love with them and you try to make a life with them, and they spend their days dehumanizing you, invalidating you, yelling at you, putting you down, disrespecting you. That's miserable. And you might stick it out because you feel like you have to, or I'm not loving them well enough. It's sort of what I call the Beauty and the Beast fantasy. Maybe if I love the beast enough, he'll turn into a prince. And there's a lot of people who sort of fall into that bucket. And so those are the two relationships where I see it's the most harmful. But listen, if you have a narcissistic boss, it can throw off your career. If you have a narcissistic sibling, you might feel like you don't have a confidant. But I do think the parents, the partners, that's really where the rubber meets the road.
What triggers narcissistic abuse?
Well, what triggers narcissistic abuse is the insecurity and the ego of the narcissist being threatened, and they explode with narcissistic rage. The problem is, for a while, you can't figure out what it is that's setting this narcissist off. It can often be the littlest slight. It could be that they had a bad day somewhere else and they're taking it out on you. It's like coming home and yelling at a pet because you can't yell at your boss kind of thing. So you don't know what the thing that set it off, but all you do know for sure is somewhere along the day, their ego got injured. They felt out of control. Their insecurity boiled over. And it's the people closest to them that often feel like they're easiest targets, especially if you keep forgiving them and giving them second chances. Then they're like, ooh, this is great. I can keep coming home and doing this, get all my rage out. This person's still sticking around. Great.
Would a narcissist date somebody for, let's say, 5 years, then get married, and then start the abuse?
No. A lot of people say, well, they became narcissistic after we were married. I was like, oh, no, they did not.
That's good to know, though.
First date, it was there. Narcissism is a pattern that you bring into it from early adulthood on. I mean, it was developing all along, right? But it's there from the jump. And when we do sort of the autopsy on the relationship and really go right back to the beginning, they'll say, yeah, I guess he was late to all our first few dates, and there was a lot of really poor boundaries. And one time he got screamed at me because I mistakenly ate his order of fried rice or whatever it may be, that the patterns were there. They just were romanticizing it because and he wanted to spend all this time with me. He wanted to be with me 24/7. That to me is an alarm bell. That's really controlling.
This series is about narcissism as a general topic. However, I look at this a lot as the series to watch if you're going to start dating.
Amen.
Knowing this information, having this power, having this education allows you to avoid 5, 10, 15, 20, maybe 40 years of disaster.
You better believe that prevention in this case is the best cure. If we could keep people from getting these relationships in the first place. Because what you got to remember is, I've known people who actually were well put together, kind, empathic, relatively confident. They'd get into a relationship with a narcissist. 15 years later, they're a shell of their prior selves. They're riddled with self-doubt. They've complete and utter loss of self-esteem. They don't know which way is up. They completely think they're undeserving. I mean, it really does a number on them from the inside out. So if we could stop it from the first place, because what ends up happening is, once a person's in, people will often fight for a relationship. So that's where you want to stop them from getting in the first place.
And especially if you have kids.
Oh, once you have kids,
especially if
it's a
you're
disaster.
financially dependent on that person.
And many narcissists try to make their partner financially dependent on them. They ensure that they quit their jobs, or make it so that, because that's one way that can make sure that person doesn't leave them and allows them to control them, because control is a big part of the narcissistic dynamic.
Yeah, I'm so thankful that I'm learning all this. If you find yourself getting abused by a narcissist in a romantic relationship, what are your tips for that person?
If you're being abused in a narcissistic relationship, first of all, I'm always going to say, especially to Med Circle listeners, if you're being physically abused or any other abuse that's putting yourself or children or other dependent adults in that environment at danger, you must get help. And I'm hoping Med Circle might even be able to put a connection to the National Domestic Violence Hotline, because you've got to get help immediately. That's a danger and a risk situation. Beyond that, we're really getting also into psychological abuse and emotional abuse, which to me are equally harmful as physical abuse, that you need to ensure that you're getting appropriate mental health services, perhaps even through a support group, that other people being affected by this narcissistic abuse, like kids, are getting mental health services because they're seeing this happen. Make sure that you take care of you, because it's very easy for your health to fail when you're in a relationship with a narcissist. I've seen people get very, very ill due to a variety of stress-related illnesses, and I had to wonder how much of this was really due to years of being in a relationship with a narcissist. Cultivate other support networks. People who are narcissistic often try to isolate their partners. They don't want them to get the support and validation of other people. So break out of that isolation. If it's friends at work, friends at your spiritual community, your church, your temple, whatever, but find a way to get those people. You can, someone at the gym, somewhere, create friendships in other spaces so you don't get too far down the rabbit hole, family members, just to get that dose of reality, that kind of thing. All of those things become important. You need a reality check. A lot of times people, it's almost like you want people to see you with that person, but here's the thing. A lot of time narcissistic people don't verbally abuse their partners in front of other people. They're smart enough to know they got to look good to the public, and they save that for behind closed doors or in the car or whatever.
Yeah, that's what I was just thinking, is first having the courage and education and wherewithal to know I'm in this scenario.
Yeah.
This is bad. This is hurting me, and it's likely because of this.
Yeah.
I think people are afraid to admit that.
They're ashamed. There's a lot of shame.
Right.
It's so sad. I've worked with many people who were in a relationship with a narcissist, and they were horribly ashamed and embarrassed that they let it get this far. And I said, you know what? It's not like it went from this to this in a day.
No.
This has been happening over time, and you've almost sadly, slowly been adjusting to this change in the climate, and now you're here. And yes, it looks gruesome from here, but this didn't happen overnight, and we're not going to be able to undo it overnight.
Yeah, it's the frog sitting in a pot of water.
It's the frog.
Yeah,
That's
but the frog
exactly
can still jump out.
Yeah.
So jump out.
Yeah, but until the frog gets boiled to death.
Yes.
That's the problem, and we're trying to catch people before that happens.
Yes, we are. What about people who have a work relationship and their coworker is narcissistic and abusing them? How do they handle that?
When you have a coworker who's behaving in that way, you've really got to protect your interests, because most HR departments can't do much without documentation. I tell people, when you're in that situation, as soon as you start a new job, create little email folders for everyone you work with and save everything. Hopefully, you never need it.
Never need it.
And 40 years down the road, you had the most wonderful career, and they clear out your account and it's done. That's not going to be most people. So you save everything, and it starts to get a little wonky, and you have to be very careful, because if it's a company server, you may need to print hard copies of these emails. You may not have access to that. You may not be able to do stuff with that at work. Make sure you create files when you work with difficult coworkers. Save every email. Save text messages.
Yes.
I mean, we're talking everything.
Yes.
When you try to avoid meeting with them one-on-one alone, if that's possible, if you can have someone else in the room with you, and it may sound weird, you don't have to make it hostile, but try to make it that there's other people present, because then that gives you, again, another set of ears. However, if you can't have that, one thing I recommend people who have a narcissistic coworker they're concerned about, create a memo after the meeting, send the memo, say, I just want to make sure that this is a very clear review of what we just met, use quotes wherever possible, put a read receipt on the email so you know they received the memo, and then keep these things as records. And so you really want to ensure that you have that, because you can't do much in terms of HR or with an attorney until you have all of that. Ooh. But we also know that workplace stress is actually the type of stress most associated with developing physical illness. So it really is important that you manage your workplace stress. Once again, consider getting therapy. Have a safe, confidential space.
Yes.
Don't make this about workplace gossip. It's so easy to have those whispered conversations. Then you're the one who might end up getting into trouble. Don't post your workplace strife.
It's not going to fix anything.
Not going to fix anything. Don't put your workplace strife on social media. If you have a narcissistic coworker and they decide to go there, don't get in the mud with them.
Yeah.
You've got to play a clean game when it's this kind of situation. Make sure you engage in self-care. And then you might want to slowly but surely, if you feel like the writing's on the wall, let's say this narcissistic coworker has outlasted everyone.
Yeah.
And maybe that the culture of the company is that they're not going to get rid of this person.
Maybe it's the boss.
Exactly. And if it's the boss, you have even more problems, same rules. But you may need to start working on an exit strategy, sadly. We do know that there's some interesting research that has come out that when people work in with a toxic narcissistic boss, that you'll sometimes find that they band together and do some interesting work together. It can actually cause, when you're united around a common enemy, that can create interesting. The boss is narcissistic and the workers might actually all unite. So that can sometimes be a nice downstream effect. Make sure you have allies at work, people you can turn to, not for gossip, but just to ensure that you're protecting yourself. But also realize you may need to cut your losses. It may be the dream job, but it's not the dream job if you're working with toxic colleagues.
That's not.
Slowly craft an escape strategy and do it quietly, because in some places they may be vindictive enough to stop you from trying to get a new position. It can get really dark really, really fast.
I hope people had their pen and paper out for that, because that was a lot of actionable, amazing tips. What about the support? Okay. I have a friend who's in a relationship with a narcissist. How do I help that friend?
Number one, do not call their partner out, because that person's going to feel the need to defend their partner.
Don't call the partner out in any circumstance?
Yeah, no, definitely point out the patterns and the behaviors and listen non-judgmentally. It can be very overwhelming. It's so hard, because you want to say, here's my phone, text him right now. And to say, you really want to say, it hurts to hear this. It must be hurt even more to be experiencing it.
That's good.
So when someone you love is telling you that they're being hurt in a relationship, your temptation is just want to go tear that person's throat out. Be with your friend's pain, but don't give them an unrealistic plan. Say, right now, we're going to your house, we're getting your stuff, we're getting out. They may not be willing to do that, and that might scare them to even talk with you more. Listen non-judgmentally. Tell them, this doesn't feel okay. This feels like abuse to me. Are you okay? And then ask them the $1 million question. How can I help? We all want to give advice. We all want to get in there and fix it. How can I help? Your friend may say, you know what, you're helping, just listen. And I'm going to be calling you in the middle of the night, and say, I'm here. Instead of saying, Okay, let's rent you an apartment right now. Let's do this right now. You know, that's overwhelming, and a person may be really, really freaked out. So when our loved ones are struggling, we often want to get in there and do what I call casseroling. Like, somebody died, here's a tuna casserole. I'm like, I don't know that they want that. Maybe they just need you to listen. And if they want a tuna casserole, trust me, they'll ask.
Tell you. Yeah.
So ask them, how can I help?
In conducting all these interviews with you and lots of other experts, the power of asking a question to somebody you love is probably the best way to show support. If you ask it without judgment, if you ask it with sincerity, and if you ask it without trying to get anything from them, not like, well, do you think moving would help? That's not the right question, but how can I help? I'm sorry you're going through that, that must be tough. Those questions, I mean, are so simple, so easy.
They're huge, and also, don't second guess them. A person in a narcissistic relationship is being second guessed and doubted 100 times a day. The last thing you want to do is say, are you sure that's happening? That's gaslighting your friend. You're participating in the abuse.
Yes.
You know, I mean, you listen to your friend. Why is your friend going to lie about this? And if this is their track record of lying about this stuff, you need to find a new friend.
Get a new friend, right.
You know? So, I mean, but you really, if this is, because odds are by the time they're coming and telling you this, it's been going on for a while.
Yes. Wow. I loved everything that you put out here because it gave me one big sigh of relief that there is hope.
There is hope.
People are out there dealing with a narcissist.
You know, the thing that happens to people who are in narcissistic relationships is a phenomenon we call learned helplessness. It is a theoretical model that came out in the 1970s. But when it plays out here, a person in a relationship with a narcissist feels that nothing they do helps. No matter what they say, what they do, how they communicate, how they look, anything ever changes anything. So they start feeling helpless and they get paralyzed and then they get stuck. And many times they often can also become depressed because learned helplessness is considered to be part of the developmental model of depression. So it's that sense of nothing I'm doing is working. When you're in a relationship with someone and you feel like nothing you're doing is working, that could be a real ringer that you're in a relationship with a narcissist.
Well, luckily you provided plenty of tips, plenty of actionable steps for people to take. But the question remains, is there hope for the narcissists themselves? Dr. Ramani?
Okay, so first of all, you got to get them into the therapy room, right? So most narcissists do not come into therapy saying, "Hi, I'm a narcissist and I want some therapy."
Help. Yeah.
I did have one person in my career do that.
And
literally walked in the door. That's what he said. I'm a narcissist and I want therapy. I said, "Have a seat. Let's see what we can do." And
well, hold on. And was he a narcissist? What, a narcissistic personality disorder?
Yeah.
And what kind of help did he get?
It's long-term, insight-oriented work, but it's slow. It's really, really slow. And he's very committed to growing, to doing better. He wants this. And it's an incredibly slow process. And this is a guy who wants it. So when people say, is there a treatment model that works well with them? I would say we typically learn a person is narcissistic in therapy because they came in with some other problem. I'm having problems with my girlfriend. It might be substance use. I've been feeling sad. Work isn't going well. I'm not getting along with my boss. I'm mad at my mother. So they'll come in with something else. And then they'll tell you their story, and maybe by the first or second session, you'll be like, oh, I'm getting this. You might even notice in the first session because there'll be a real antagonism from them to you.
Sorry to interrupt you, but we mentioned in a previous episode, very quickly you can spot if someone's a narcissist, you specifically, if you're at a party. In a therapy session, it takes you one to two.
Takes a little longer.
Is it because they're guarded?
They're guarded, and we're having a very curated kind of conversation. We're getting their history and all of that. You might pick some of the top notes up pretty quickly, like they'll talk about all their achievements. And I once had somebody say, "You want to know how many cars I own? Let me tell you how many cars I own." And one person even said, "I could buy and sell you 20 times over." And I was thinking, more like 40, but okay. So some of it's like right out there. Like you'd really.
And what is your reaction when someone says that?
Utter humility. I'm like, that's so interesting, but I actually don't care. So let's.
Okay, and then you say you don't care, and then what do they say?
They'll say, they'll look offended, and I'll say, I'm actually trying to learn your inner world. The other stuff, that's all fluff to me. So please tell me about, look, we're going to work on this inside. And that's, of course, terrifying because those shelves are a lot more empty.
Yeah, that's why they have 20 cars.
Exactly. That's why we have 20 cars, but, there's there's nothing but room at the end kind of thing. So that's the struggle. But I have to say that you often end up working on the thing they came into therapy with, the relationship problem, the substance use issue, whatever it is, okay? But then you start working backwards on the other, we dig deeper. What was childhood like? Mm-hmm. What was, how do they manage frustration? How do they manage anger and rage? A lot of the work of therapy and working with a narcissistic client is building a trusting therapeutic alliance. You gotta like them. And I gotta tell you, I've worked with some people brutally narcissistic. I like them. I mean, some of them I've really liked. I'm like, wow, I see the vulnerability. And I'll even say that. I'll say, I see the beautiful little boy. And I'm so sad the world missed out on this. And they'll cry. And they'll cry a lot. And I'll see it. Like there's something vulnerable.
And they're not playing you?
There's no point. I'm going to get paid the same whether or not I'm saying nice stuff. You know what I'm saying? Like It's not like I get it paid on per compliment basis.
True.
Right? So you want to get them to come in every week because something's happening. Sometimes I try to outplay you or outwit you and tell you I know more things than you. And I say, you know what? I'm always a student. So teach me. So what I don't do is get in the mud with them. I don't defend myself. If they don't feel, I'm good enough, and I've heard that, like, you're not that good. And I'll say, that's absolutely important that you feel I am good. And I have a list of referrals and I pull it out of my desk and I say, I actually highly recommend these therapists as well. So they're used to people going, going head to head with them. I don't play that game. And I think good therapists who work with narcissists don't. So it's really that you work on the current issue, you work backwards, you try to create a strong, consistent, empathic therapeutic alliance. When they tell you a sad story, you genuinely feel sadness. You'll say, my gosh, that's so sad. And you know what I'll often get is, I never thought of it that way. And I'll say, really? Because I'm actually feeling that inside. And then we'll break that down.
Wow.
The difference in our two emotional experiences. So you sort of learn in the moment. I try to work on mindfulness techniques with them. Like, how do they catch themselves before they say the hurtful words? How do they manage the anger? What's the source? We ask them what the source of the anger is. So it's really it's cognitive behavioral work, but a lot of it's humanistic work. There is something good in there. Mm-hmm. And my job, it's almost like being a prospector. We're gonna find it, we're gonna show it to them, and we're gonna cultivate it. And so some of it's existential work. Can they learn to start taking responsibility for the hurts they perpetrate on other people and perhaps try to find another path next time? If you're willing to do that kind of depth work, we might be able to get you somewhere. But they're baby steps. Let's say a really high-functioning, empathic, solid person is sitting up here. The kind of person who's going to take care of you if you're sick and is there for you and doesn't need validation all the time, okay? And a narcissist is down here, okay? Or even down here. Mm-hmm. We're not getting them here.
Right.
We're not getting them here. We're going to get them here. And maybe that's enough. That might be enough to say, all right, I'll stay in the marriage. I realize it's not satisfying. Or someone's like, all right, I'll try to cultivate a relationship with my dad, but realize it may not be what I wanted. Or, yeah, okay, I can try to keep working with this person. Getting them from here to here is Herculean. This isn't possible. And if this is the standard, it's not going to fly.
One of the traits of a narcissist is that they lie. Mm-hmm. And one of the keys to successful therapy is honesty.
Yeah.
So how do you make that happen?
Depends on what they're lying about. Depends on what they're lying about. They may lie about certain ridiculous kinds of achievements. They might exaggerate the carat weight of a diamond ring or the price of a purse. It's such nonsense. I wouldn't know. You know what I'm saying? Like, if you tell me the bag or the car costs this much, it's irrelevant. It's really things like, are they lying about whether or not they're using substances? Are they being honest about something we made an agreement to be honest about? And make it that a high stakes game. Like, it's almost like a contract you make with them. Say, this is only gonna work if you're honest with me. The confidentiality brought about by therapy helps a lot. Because you can't say like, hey, I'm gonna call all your friends and say that blah, 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 you're having an affair or something like that. That's not, I'm not gonna do that.
Right.
So it sort of stops kind of there. And so it's about creating, that becomes an honest space. The lying, really, there's no incentive. They're not trying to date me, so I'm not going to be impressed by their car. You know what I'm saying? Because nothing like that is happening. So it's in some ways you might have to catch them in their pattern and say, gosh, you come in here a lot and you talk a lot about all the stuff you have. And while I'm sure you enjoy it and while I'm sure it's beautiful, it's really not relevant in here. And it's getting in the way of me getting to know you. You know, and so you're kind of taking away their usual tools.
Are there medications that can work?
Depends on what else the person with narcissism is living with. Everyone wishes there was a magic pill.
Of course.
Everyone begs, there's got to be something he can take. There's no jerk pill.
Yeah.
Like if there was the anti-jerk pill, Big Pharma would be making more money than they already are, trust me, okay? So sometimes people will try things like antidepressants with people with narcissism because they are having sort of an irritable edge. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes people will use anti-anxiety medication with narcissists because they're having anxiety about a specific situation in their life, typically because they're not getting enough validation. Sometimes there'll be drugs used to manage issues around addiction, but that's much more specific to the addiction and it's not going to address the narcissism. But it would be the other things kind of hanging out with the narcissism that you'd use medication for. There is no known medication out there that is labeled for use to manage or treat narcissistic personality disorder or narcissistic traits.
If a couple is in therapy, or couples that you've personally had, have you ever suggested to the non-narcissist in the couple, leave?
If I'm working with a couple, I've never done that, but God, I've been tempted. I mean, like you almost wanted to slip them a note, like on their way out, right? Ethically, it's not how I roll. If there's a case of domestic violence,